Yeah, well, why don't we stay on that topic of the college football playoffs? With the Pac-12 season being only 7 games compared to all of the other conferences, this could potentially screw up a lot of things for the Pac-12 if they want to be considered for the college football playoff. So, I mean, Ryan, what do you think about this? If a Pac-12 team were to go 7-0, how much of a consideration do you think they would be in for the college football playoffs?
I think it depends on who they play, but I do think they have a shot. But as we've seen in past years, even when they've been close, and a team like Oregon, Utah, any of those schools they've been close, like in the championship game, they just don't get that nod because the overall talent in with the Pac-12 teams just isn't on that higher level yet, and it's really going to hurt these teams like USC, Utah, and Oregon because like you said earlier, if in the first 2-3 weeks, like one of those teams misses a game, like they're probably just cut out from the Pac-12 or from the college football playoffs.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I just don't think I think it's too hard to make a case for an undefeated Pac-12 team to have a leg up on some of those other schools and some of the other conferences that are most likely going to be, have like a one-loss team, right? Like I don't see like let's just say Oregon ends up going 7-0, right? They go 7-0, they win the Pac-12 championship. Do you really see them having an upper hand over, a 9-1 LSU or a 9-1 Alabama, a 9-1 Georgia, even a 9-1 Florida? Like I don't, because I really don't think you can make the argument that 7 games was enough to really prove that you're one of the top 4 teams. Because like, I mean, in my opinion, it's just not good enough to get into the playoffs because all those teams that I just mentioned play against each other, right? So one of those teams is gonna have a win over the other. So like, there's your significant win right there. Like Oregon, if they were to go 7-0, their only significant wins would be against Utah and USC, right? But like even like an 8-2 Florida team. I mean, if Florida goes 8-2 and their only losses are against LSU and Georgia, they've still beaten Texas A&M. They still beat Tennessee and they still beat Kentucky. So like those 3 wins are, in my opinion, far outweigh a win over Utah and a win over USC. So like I don't know. I think the Pac-12 is just pretty screwed here. Like I don't see a scenario where a team goes 7-0 and they can sneak into the top 4.
Yeah, especially this year, I don't think it's the year for a Pac-12 team to make the playoffs. I mean, as you said, like those schools, there's better competition, and Pac than the voters have favored those SEC schools in the past, and that's just how it's going to be. I mean, like, yeah, I don't see a path for any of these Pac-12 schools right
Yeah.
now.
And those were just the SEC teams that I mentioned. We didn't even talk about the Big Ten, like Penn State and Texas. Like they're going to be hanging around too. So I don't know. I mean, here's something else that I just thought of. I mean, what if Utah or USC was that team to go 7-0? Like, would they be more considered in the college football playoffs? Because then they would have a win. Their probably most significant win would be over Oregon. And if Utah were to go 7-0, they would probably have that significant win over Oregon. Is that win over Oregon enough to push them into the college football playoffs?
I mean, I think if USC, I think they would have a better shot to maybe get in just because of their just being an iconic team throughout the last 20 plus years. So I think they could have that. They could maybe get that edge. But as we saw last year, when you have both Pac-12, I mean, both Pac-12 teams at the end of that top 10 tier, it's hard for even if one of those teams wins, as you said, if you're not beating a top 4 to 5 team, it's hard to jump ahead and out jump some of those teams.
Yeah, I think that one's a little bit closer for me, like if they have that Oregon win. But like I said, I mean, if Florida ends up going 9-1, because I see Florida as kind of one of those bubble teams right now, like they'll be hanging around, 6-10. So they'll be screwing things up a little bit for the Pac-12. Like if they were to go 9-1, they're gonna have a win over Georgia or LSU. So that one of those wins right there is already good enough than what any of the Pac-12 teams can scrape together for a significant win. So I still don't think that's that significant a win over Utah, because I like a win over Georgia or a win over LSU is much more of that boost that's going to put you into the top 4.
Yeah, and in a normal season, even if a Pac-12 school would go undefeated, I think they would struggle. And it showed not undefeated, but they still have shown that it's very hard to make the playoffs. The way this playoff format is constructed, it doesn't favor any schools outside of that top 5 to 6 group of schools. It's just very hard for these teams to make an impact. And the bowl games just don't mean as much to these schools.
I mean, if only the if only the college football playoffs was 8 teams instead of 4. I mean, seriously, how much fun would that be? I mean, like that was another thing that I was pretty surprised to hear about from the webinar yesterday. It was just, how passively Larry Scott answered a question. I think somebody from the media asked a question about whether or not the NCAA was considering an expansion. And Larry Scott basically said that there was no sort of push from the Pac-12 to the NCAA to expand the playoffs. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Like Larry Scott basically said that there was no sort of push at all. Like, I mean, that was just so puzzling to me. Like, if there was any conference that should be leading the charge in those kinds of talks, and like especially in a season, with these circumstances that we're in, even if it's only just for this season, like an expanded playoffs would benefit the Pac-12 so tremendously, right? Like the Pac-12 should have been front and center, like, leading the charge in this whole thing. Like, we need an expanded playoffs, because if the playoffs was 8 teams, like your 7-0 Pac-12 team gets in no problem, like no questions asked, right? Like they're gonna sneak in anywhere from like the 6 to the 8 seed. So like,
yeah, and in general, every year there's pretty much would be a Pac-12 team.
Yeah, like
there's 8 teams, like one of those Pac-12, whoever wins the championship, like is obviously going to be ranked like very high, and always is. They're just always on that borderline.
Right, you could, I mean, in an 18 playoff, like you can do it 2 different ways, right? Like you can do the top 8 teams, or you can just do, whoever wins the conference from each of the Power 5 schools. There's your 5 right there, and then 3 wildcard teams, right? That would guarantee a Pac-12 team in the college football playoffs every year. Like, it was just so puzzling to me that it didn't sound like Larry Scott and the Pac-12 was pushing for this at all. Like they would be benefiting from this so much. Like, I don't know. Like, it just blew my mind that there didn't seem to be any sort of aggressive push for not only for the future college football playoffs, but for this year especially.
Yeah, it seems like he's on his way out. It sounds like, from everything I'm hearing on Twitter and on the internet, like he won't be with the Pac-12 like that much longer, which will be good news for all Pac-12 fans, because obviously what you were just saying, he just doesn't obviously know how to push this conference in the right direction anymore.
Yeah, 100%. Like, isn't that why we're doing this whole thing, like cramming all these games in, is so that we can get a team in the college football playoffs, right? Like, I know the Pac-12 and Larry Scott wants a Pac-12 football team in its, in the college football playoffs, right? So like, why are we not making a more like an effort to expand the playoffs, just not for the future, but for this year in general? Like, and like, you can even just make the argument that like under these circumstances, like an 8-team playoff would be needed. Or, like something that we talked about on last week's show, like I don't see the big deal at all in just pushing the college football playoffs back a few weeks, right? Like why are we so hard set on this January 1st deadline? Like, does anybody really care if we play the Rose Bowl on January 1st as opposed to, January 7th or January 14th? Like, I don't know.
And the college football playoffs, they're always in domes, so like it doesn't even matter. Like, yeah, like I don't know why they're pushing. Like, I mean, I know why they want to have a smaller season to limit the amount of contact between different teams because of COVID-19, but like, yeah, I agree. Like, if anything, just have the college football playoffs in domes, and the rest of the bowl games that they can't fit in, like maybe on like East Coast places, they just put them all on the West Coast.
Yeah, I think that the only way a Pac-12 team could sneak into the college football playoffs is just if, the Pac-12 kind of fixes their schedules and gives those favorable teams good matchups, right? Because that's the main thing that's holding those Pac-12 teams back, apart from only playing 7 games. But it's just those significant wins, right? Like the Pac-12 competition in general, there's only 3 good teams, right? So those 3 good teams need to play each other. Like one of those teams needs to go 7-0, where one or two of those wins are against the top team. Like if Oregon goes 7-0, they're gonna have to play USC. They're gonna have to play Washington. They will play Washington since they're in the North, but they're gonna have to play Utah. Like those two games where the North is playing the South and the South is playing the North. It has to be those top teams playing against each other, and it's gonna look a little funky, right? It's gonna look like, oh, the Pac-12 is rigging the schedule, but that's what you have to do, right? Like you can't randomize the schedule because then Oregon goes 7-0, but their only significant win is against Utah, and in the Pac-12 championship, or it's only against USC in the Pac-12 championship. So like there has to be more of like their schedule needs to be fixed in a way that the 7 games can really prove that us playing those 7 games was enough to get into the college football playoffs.
Yeah, because the reality is like teams like Arizona, Colorado,